Moment I was standing at the podium, my hands wrapped around the edge of the lectern, looking out at 200 people who had come to watch me accept the award. The next, I heard my brother's voice cut through the applause like a blade. "She doesn't deserve that." He didn't whisper it. He said it loud enough for the people in the first 3 rows to turn their heads. I watched my mother close her eyes. I watched my father stare at the floor. And I stood there in my dress, holding a crystal plaque with my name etched into it, feeling the blood drain from my face. That was the night everything changed, not because of what my brother said, but because of what happened after. I need to go back a little, because none of this makes sense without the before. I grew up in a house in Columbus, Ohio, the kind of house that looked fine from the outside. Beige siding, a 2-car garage, a flower bed my mother kept immaculate every spring. We had a dog named Biscuit and a minivan and a neighborhood where everyone waved at each other from their driveways. From the outside, we were completely ordinary. Inside, there was a system. My brother. I'll call him what everyone else called him, which was simply the Golden One, though never out loud, was 2 years older than me. His name was Lawrence. Lawrence had been a point guard in high school. Lawrence had gotten a partial scholarship to Ohio State. Lawrence had a laugh that filled rooms and a handshake that made fathers trust him immediately. My parents poured themselves into Lawrence the way some people pour concrete, completely with the intention of building something permanent. I was the other one. That was never said either, but it was understood. When I made honor roll, my mother said, "Good, keep it up." When Lawrence made the dean's list, my father took him to a steakhouse in downtown Columbus and called my grandmother to tell her. When I got into law school, my parents said, "Are you sure that's what you want?" When Lawrence got promoted at his logistics company, my mother put a sign in the yard. I don't say this to make you feel sorry for me. I say it because it explains why I kept trying so hard for so long. When you grow up in a house where love feels like a limited resource that's already been allocated, you either stop reaching for it or you reach harder. I reached harder. I went to law school at Georgetown. I graduated in the top 8% of my class. I got a clerkship with a federal judge in D.C., and then I joined a civil rights firm in Chicago, and I worked 70 hours a week for 3 years until I was good enough that people started to notice. Lawrence, in those same years, had changed jobs 4 times, gotten divorced once, and borrowed money from my parents twice that I knew of. My father referred to this as Lawrence finding his path. When I asked my mother once, gently, genuinely curious, why Lawrence's stumbles were called finding a path, while my achievements were just called expected, she looked at me and said, "You've always been the strong one, honey. Lawrence needs more support." I held on to that. I told myself it was almost a compliment. It wasn't. My husband, I'll call him by his first name, which is Theodore, came into my life during my 2nd year at the firm. He was a senior partner at a corporate litigation practice across the street. We met at a bar association event, argued for 45 minutes about a 7th Circuit decision, and then he asked if I wanted to continue the argument over dinner. I said yes. We got married 18 months later at a small ceremony in Michigan, on a bluff overlooking Lake Michigan, with 22 people and no flower girls and no drama. Lawrence did not come to our wedding. He told my parents he had a work conflict. My mother told me not to make a big deal of it. I didn't. Theodore knew everything about my family. He'd heard the stories. He'd watched me come home from holiday visits quiet and tight-lipped. And he had learned, without me ever asking him to, not to push on those nights. But he also watched carefully. That was something I loved about him. He was always watching, cataloging, understanding. He grew up the son of a federal prosecutor in Atlanta, and he had a prosecutor's instinct for when something was being built toward a conclusion. He told me once, about a year into our marriage, "Your brother isn't confused, he's resentful. There's a difference." I told him he was overthinking it. He wasn't. The American Bar Association's Regional Pro Bono Award is not the Nobel Prize. I want to be clear about that. It is an honor, but it is a specific kind of honor, the kind given to lawyers who do serious work for people who can't pay for it. And it matters to me because the work matters to me. I had spent 2 years taking on housing discrimination cases for families on the south side of Chicago. Cases that didn't make headlines but that kept people in their homes and gave children a stable place to sleep. The award felt like someone had seen that work and said, "This counts." The ceremony was held at a hotel ballroom in Chicago on a Thursday evening in March. It was a black tie event. 200 attorneys, judges, and civic leaders. Theodore sat in the front row in a navy suit, and when they called my name, he was already on his feet before anyone else. My parents came. I had not expected them to. It was a 4-hour drive from Columbus, but my mother called 2 weeks before and said they wanted to be there. I was genuinely moved. I bought them tickets and reserved a hotel room and arranged for a car to pick them up from the parking garage. I texted Lawrence the details because my mother said she'd mentioned it to him. Lawrence showed up. I didn't know he was coming. My mother hadn't told me, and I found out later she hadn't told him he wasn't invited either. She had given him the details the same way she'd given them to me, as though this were a family event rather than a professional one. I spotted him from across the room during the cocktail hour. He was in a sport coat that didn't quite fit, drinking a scotch at the bar, scanning the room with an expression I recognized from childhood. It was the expression he wore when he had decided something was unfair. I went to say hello. I kept it brief. He was stiff, monosyllabic, and looked at Theodore with the particular flatness of someone who has decided in advance not to be impressed. Theodore extended his hand, said it was good to meet him, and Lawrence shook it without making eye contact. Dinner passed without incident. The speeches began. I sat at the head table with the other honorees and waited. When they called my name and I walked to the podium, the applause was genuine and warm, and I had not prepared for how it would feel. I had written notes on a note toner, but I didn't look at them. I talked about a woman named, I'll call her Mrs. Patterson, a 67-year-old retired teacher who had been unlawfully evicted from her apartment of 22 years so that the building could be converted to luxury condominiums. I talked about the look on her face when the judge ruled in her favor. I talked about why this work matters. I was about halfway through when I heard it. "She doesn't deserve that." Not quite a shout, not a whisper. The specific volume of a man who wants to be heard by the people around him but maintain plausible deniability about causing a scene. I stopped mid-sentence. The room had gone the particular kind of quiet that happens when everyone hears something but no one is sure whether to acknowledge it. I looked out into the audience. I found Lawrence at a table near the back. He was holding his scotch glass and looking directly at me with an expression that was almost calm, which was worse than if he'd looked angry. I finished my speech. My voice didn't shake. I don't know how, but it didn't. I thanked the association, thanked my colleagues, thanked Theodore, and walked back to my seat. The applause was louder the second time, and I think some of it was for surviving what had just happened in front of 200 people. Theodore was very still when I sat down. That stillness was something I had come to understand. It wasn't passivity, it was control. What happened next is the part I didn't see, because I was at the front of the room. Theodore excused himself from our table approximately 40 seconds after I returned to it. He walked to the back of the ballroom. Later, 3 people independently told me what they witnessed, and the accounts were consistent enough that I believed them. Theodore sat down in the empty chair next to my brother. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a scene. He introduced himself properly, using his full name and his title, senior partner at the firm, and then he said, quietly and clearly, "What you just did is going to have consequences. I want you to understand that before the night is over." Lawrence, according to all 3 witnesses, laughed. He said something along the lines of, "She's always needed someone to fight her battles." Theodore said, "She doesn't need me to fight anything. But I am going to make sure the right people know what happened tonight." He came back to the table before the dessert course. He put his hand over mine and didn't say anything, and I didn't ask. I found out what he meant 3 days later. Theodore had spent those 3 days methodically and quietly doing something I hadn't considered. 2 of the people seated near Lawrence during the outburst were partners at prominent Chicago firms. One was a circuit court judge who sat on the board of the Bar Association. Theodore had, through entirely professional and appropriate channels, made sure those individuals had an accurate account of what had occurred, not as gossip, but as a formal matter of conduct at a professional event. The Bar Association had a code of conduct for its events. Theodore knew this because he had served on the ethics subcommittee for 4 years. Lawrence, it turned out, had recently applied for a position as a compliance officer at a financial services company based in Chicago. 2 of the partners Theodore had spoken with were connected to that company's legal team. The position required professional references and a background check that included, per the company's policy, a review of any documented incidents of professional misconduct. The association sent Lawrence a formal written notice that his conduct at the event had been logged and that he was not welcome at future association events. The letter went to the address he had registered when he signed in at the door. The compliance position was offered to another candidate. I didn't learn about any of this from Theodore. I learned about it from my mother, who called me on a Wednesday morning, furious. "Your husband had your brother blacklisted," she said. "Lawrence lost a job offer." I sat with the phone against my ear in my office and looked out the window at Lake Michigan. "Tell me exactly what you know," I said. She told me. It took about 10 minutes. When she finished, I said, "Lawrence stood up at my award ceremony and told 200 people I didn't deserve what I'd earned. In public, in front of my colleagues and my husband and the people I work with." Silence. "Mom, he did that. You know how Lawrence gets," she said. "He's been struggling. He doesn't handle seeing you succeed." She stopped herself, but not fast enough. "He doesn't handle seeing me succeed," I repeated. She didn't say anything. "I need you to hear what you just said." My father called an hour later. He was more measured, but the message was the same. Theodore had overstepped. Lawrence was going through a difficult period. The family needed to come together. He used the phrase, "let it go," twice, and "your mother is very upset" once, and not a single time did he say what Lawrence had done was wrong. I told my father I loved him. I told him I wasn't going to argue. And then I said something I had never said out loud before, something that had been living in the back of my chest for 30 years. "Dad, I have spent my entire life trying to earn something from you and Mom that Lawrence got for free. I am done trying to earn it. I hope you can understand that," he said. "That's not fair." I said, "I know." And I hung up. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from the moment you stop, not from working hard. That kind of tiredness is almost comfortable, familiar. I mean the exhaustion of the moment when you finally release something you've been holding for so long that you've forgotten what your hands feel like without it. That evening, I sat on the couch with Theodore, and I did not cry, which surprised me. I just felt the weight lift, slowly, the way a room cools when you finally open a window. "Are you okay?" Theodore asked. "I think so," I said. "I think I'm actually okay." He nodded. He got up and made tea and brought it back without being asked, and we sat there in the quiet of our apartment with the city spread out below us, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Lawrence called me once, about 6 weeks later. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail that ran for 4 minutes and 40 seconds. And I know this because I could see the length before I decided not to listen to it. I deleted it without playing it. My mother and I speak occasionally now. The calls are shorter than they used to be and the silences are longer, but they are honest in a way our conversations never were before because I no longer pretend to be fine with things that aren't fine. My father sends me articles sometimes. News stories he thinks I'll find interesting. A profile of a judge he respected. I write back. It is not the relationship I wanted when I was 7 years old. But it is real, which is more than what we had before. The woman who won the award that night, The one my brother told 200 people didn't deserve it. Went on, 6 months later, to be appointed to a civil rights advisory panel by the city of Chicago. She is, by most measures, doing just fine. Theodore and I celebrated with a quiet dinner at a restaurant we love in Lincoln Park, the kind of place with no reservations and candles in wine bottles and a menu written on a chalkboard. He ordered the pasta, I ordered the fish. We split a bottle of Burgundy and talked about everything except my family, and when we walked home afterward, I held his hand and looked up at the October sky and thought about Mrs. Patterson in her apartment of 22 years and about the look on her face when the gavel came down. Some victories are loud. They happen in ballrooms, in front of 200 people, with crystal plaques and applause that rises to the ceiling. Some victories are quiet. They happen on a Wednesday morning phone call, or in a voicemail you choose not to play, or in the simple and radical act of finally, after 30 years, letting yourself believe that you were always worth more than what you were given. Those are the ones that last. I keep coming back to that moment at the podium, not the humiliation of it that faded faster than I expected, but the clarity. Standing in front of 200 people while my brother's voice cut through the applause, I felt something I hadn't felt in 30 years of trying to earn my place in my own family. I felt completely done, not broken, done. There's a difference, and it took me a long time to understand that. What happened to Lawrence wasn't something Theodore manufactured out of spite. It was the natural weight of a choice landing exactly where it was aimed. Lawrence walked into a professional event, in a room full of attorneys and judges and people who take conduct seriously, and he chose to say out loud what he had always believed privately, that my success didn't belong to me. The room heard him, the right people heard him, and the system that he had never respected, the one built on reputation and integrity and how you treat people when you think it doesn't matter, that system responded. Not dramatically, quietly, the way real consequences usually work. I've thought a lot about what makes a person capable of doing what Lawrence did that night, and I don't think it was cruelty exactly. I think it was the absence of something, the absence of the discipline to sit with your own disappointment without turning it into a weapon. He had never been asked to develop that. My parents had removed every natural consequence from his life for decades, which meant he had never had to build the interior structure that holds a person together when things don't go their way. He got to my age without ever learning that how you behave in your worst moments is the thing that actually defines you. Theodore understood something I hadn't fully articulated yet, that the most effective response to what Lawrence did wasn't anger, wasn't confrontation, wasn't even a formal complaint filed in the heat of the moment. It was patience. It was knowing which conversations to have with which people in which order. That kind of thinking, the long game, clear-eyed, methodical kind, is something you build over years of caring about your own integrity more than your immediate satisfaction. I had spent my career building it in courtrooms. Theodore had spent his building it across negotiating tables. Lawrence had never built it at all. What I want to say to anyone who sees themselves in this story, anyone who has spent years reaching for recognition in a family that had already decided who mattered, is this: the work you do in silence, the standards you hold yourself to when no one is watching, the times you choose decency when bitterness would be easier, those things accumulate. They become the substance of who you are, and eventually they become the record that speaks for you in rooms you didn't even know you were being evaluated in. I didn't set out to win anything that night beyond a crystal plaque and a few minutes at a podium, but I walked out of that ballroom with something my brother could never take back, a room full of witnesses who saw exactly who each of us was. That's the only victory that ever really sticks.